Eugene Graner, Heartland Investor Services, is here to tell us a little bit about the potential fallout from all of this. And you're a good economics teacher as well. And, it's amazing. Friedman said so well, governments never learn, people learn. We know it works, Eugene, don't we? We just need more people that'll follow that theory.
And one of the fallacies of Keynesian economic policy is that it assumes people will be responsible. Responsible like Senator Kent Conrad, who is in charge of and chairman of many important committees, cannot produce a budget for 823 days now to even run a country, let alone concerned about taking control of its deficits. Keynesian policy was designed that when the economies falter, governments will pick up spending, create some debt on their part, but then when the economy improves, it will back off that spending and it will pay its bills off and get back to a stronger standing. So when the inevitable cyclical nature of free markets turn bad again, the Keynesian attitude was government will come in again, pick up spending, pick up some debt, and turn things faster than the normal economic cycles. It was the Russians, Russian Kondraty, last name is Kondraty, created the Kondraty cycle. And he saw the repetitiveness of every 60 years, how the greatness of the United States is always challenged. Well, of course, we were challenged in the 30s, and because of Keynesian policies, we did delay the inevitability of free market cycling down, but we always kept pushing the string, pushing it farther back, and never let the market cleanse itself by having things such as TARP, by bailing out corporations like General Motors, which is nothing more than bailing out the unions and giving them General Motors. I own General Motors vehicles, but I would be sure today that if the TARP program never existed, we would have stronger banks. J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs would be owned by other more established banks that would become established banks now. General Motors maybe might have been owned by a foreign company, but we would still have vehicles being made by much profitable organizations than General Motors were, with better plans with the unions in Detroit. Look at the plants down in the southern part of the country, in Alabama, where they make a lot of vehicles. They don't have the overhead like General Motors does with what they call the heritage costs. So Keynesian politics is a very funny road. It assumes we have politicians that can come to agreement and come to thinking better for the country, rather than being what the joke Will Rogers says, we have the best country, we have the best Congress money can buy.
No
and
kidding.
That's the problem. Self-interest overrun. And so Keynesian politics, we have now got to the point where it doesn't really work. And today's bill that we're voting for, it's laughable. So we're going to save $900 billion over 10 years by allowing an immediate increase in the debt ceiling by $900 billion. Okay, saving $900 million over 10 years. That's $900 billion over 10 years. That's $90 billion a year cuts in a country that doesn't even have a budget. So what are we cutting $90 billion from? We have continuing resolutions that run the government every year for the last 823 days. So this $90 billion, we could run this country for another 3-4 years with continuing resolutions. Who cares about $90 billion cuts? It's overrun by a continuing resolution that'll just make up the difference somewhere else.
I want to ask you about this, though. Here's the big question. Obviously, we're going to get into the devil of the details on this particular deal, but it's all designed to avoid A, supposed default, and B, potentially a downgrade. Now, some folks say a downgrade is going to happen anyway because some of the rating agencies have said you need to cut $4 trillion, and as you said, they're starting at less than $1 trillion, and then they're going to do another $1.5 trillion at some point from this committee. So at best, $2.5 trillion to offset the cap. Let's talk about downgrade first. Should folks expect a downgrade? Is a downgrade going to happen, and if it does, what is the impact?
Yes, it's inevitable. We put out in our newsletter today at heartlandinvest.com, which is a complimentary newsletter, and people can go to our website, heartlandinvest.com, and get this. And occasionally I do go off on politics when my main focus is the commodity markets. But Moody's and S&P have said, unless the cuts are $4 to $5 trillion, we will see a downgrade. Now, we'll go from the sterling silver AAA to AA. Now, that's not the end of the world, but the reality is there are funds that cannot invest in anything less than AAA. So if you have less buyers showing up at our biweekly auctions, that means it's going to entice a higher interest rate to bring other people to the table and buy into that debt. Now, if you start raising interest rates on this massive 14.5 to encroaching $15 trillion deficit as we slowly go forward each year and roll forward 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 30-year debt, and all of a sudden it's got to be 0.25% higher, 0.3% higher in interest rates. Guess what? This debt ceiling that they're supposed to be raising, so it takes until after the 2012 elections. Unfortunately, and as you know, Scott, all bills are run through the OMB, and everything is always done in a vacuum, that nothing changes. The Office of Management and Budget, they do everything in a vacuum, and it's based off of, okay, today's world will be tomorrow's world and next year's world. What if something happens in the next 3 to 5 months that causes that spike in interest rates to happen quicker and at a faster rate of ascent? We could have this blow up in Obama's face and, in fact, bump the debt ceiling before elections of next year. Because many times you've watched this happen. Office of Management and Budget, they take these and they run the bill and they give them an answer, and they think it's going to be after the 2012 elections. The way we've been experiencing volatility in the economic place since 2007, 2008 crisis, where literally we think all of Wall Street is going to fail literally one particular week. How are we not to say something like this doesn't occur next week?
How sweet would that be? How sweet would that? I mean, not sweet for the fact that we're becoming another Greece here, but from the standpoint of clearly Obama. Okay, fine. I'll give up on tax cuts. I'll give up on everything. Just get me past the election. And if what you're predicting ends up happening, it could end up being sooner than the election. Have to have this debate all over again.
Something if it's October of 2012, and remember,
there you go. I like that.
John McCain was not my choice. He was just the only choice we had, aside from somebody we knew nothing about, to become president. And it was the month of October that John McCain went behind the polls and lost to Obama. Yeah. Obama didn't win. Obama won because everybody was just sick of the same old, same old. Well, we could have this debt crisis occur in October of 2012 if the unknown economic minefields we keep stepping into every 6 months blows up in our face, and all of a sudden our debt is reauctioned at 1/4 point higher, 3/8 point higher. Then all of a sudden, this Office of Management and Budget, who always works in a vacuum, and you know this, Scott, this vacuum comes back and bites them.
All right, Armageddon is the word the Treasury Secretary has used. We're going to ask Eugene when we come back whether or not that's something that he worries about, again, on the default question as well. So we'll talk about that when we come back on the Common Sense Club and the Scott Hannon Show. Eugene Graner, Heartland Investor Services, our guest. Get his free newsletter at his website as well. Take a break, back with more. By the way, check out ScottHannon.com. You can get copies of the book Grassroots, A Common Sense Action Agenda for America, personally autographed for you and your loved ones. Check it out, ScottHannon.com. It's also a place to connect with the show 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Back with more after this. Don't go away. It's everywhere. Gold and silver. conversation with Eugene Graner, Heartland Investor Services. Default, Armageddon. We've heard those terms over and over again, which has obviously spooked the market and I think rushed everybody into some kind of a deal because we didn't know who'd get the blame if it did come. Is that a real worry here, actual default of the United States of America, Eugene?
Actually, no. Not in the sense of a default like you would experience in Greece or in Spain. There's one thing different. The United States has its own central bank, its own printing press, so to speak. Whereas if you live in the European community, you have 13, 14 countries that have to get along and agree to a central banking system that brings those countries together. And so a central banking system there is ruled differently where other countries have to come in line, or you've got 13 countries staring you down saying, get it right. The U.S. just deals with the Federal Reserve, a private banking conglomerate that the U.S. government, the Congress, in 1913 contracted out our work to a private banking conglomerate. And they still will do what we want, but we have to allow ourselves to have another credit card. So mom and dad at the table said, okay, children, we're going to get another credit card. And this credit card is going to give us $900 billion to get to the end of the year. And our private conglomerate, the Federal Reserve, will do the wishes of Congress. This is not the Federal Reserve saying we're at the debt limit. Please don't think that the Federal Reserve won't give us this money. They will give us whatever we ask for.
Or just print some more, right?
Yeah. At our table, we said, okay, Federal Reserve, we want $900 billion more. And their answer, okay, where would you like it?
All right, 2 quick questions in the minute we have left. Will the credit rating downgrade, which you anticipate happening, impact the average investor, and how?
It impacts the average investor initially. It's our our private debt that goes up. Excuse me, the public debt goes up. Well, what happens as the interest rates for public debt goes up, if people are pursuing those yields, then private debt in competition with that goes up as well. I had said on your show about 2 years ago that the reason why interest rates weren't moving higher at the time was the economy was so dead that the government was the only borrowing boy on the street. So as long as he was it and the public wasn't borrowing, he could have all he wants at low rates.
The answer is the higher rates are going to trickle down to all of us.
Trickle down economics and interest rates. If the government rate goes up, then the private sector has to go up to compete.
And all this kabuki dance didn't avoid that downgrade. That's the tragedy of all this. Eugene Graner, Heartland Investor Services. Make sure you check out his free newsletter with great information. Thanks, Eugene. Always appreciate the insight.
Thank you for having me on, Scott.
Stephen Hayes of the Weekly Standard. When we come back, don't go away on the Common Sense Club.